She was only 6 years old when she offered up the very thing that was keeping her alive. The oppressive heat beat down on the small trading post, turning the air into a thick, suffocating blanket. Young Caroline Ruth clutched the small canteen that held her water ration, the metal warm against her skin. But when she peered through the wavy glass and saw the native infant, limp and pale in his mother's desperate grasp, something in her young heart made a decision that would alter the course of their lives. The brutal heatwave had held its grip for days, trapping everyone at the isolated outpost. Caroline's father paced near the shaded doorway, his hands clenched as he watched the dust devils dance across the parched earth. Her mother sat on a wooden crate, fanning their daughter with a piece of cardboard, trying to offer some small relief. Through the warped window, they could see the small band of native people who had sought refuge in the sliver of shade cast by the building's overhang. A tribal woman cradled her baby, but even from a distance, they could tell the child was barely stirring. The infant's lips were cracked and dry, and his mother's face was etched with a desperation that needed no translation. Caroline pressed her face to the warm window pane, her breath fogging the glass. The baby was so still. She thought of her own thirst, the constant ache in her throat, and tried to imagine how much worse it must be for that tiny child with nothing to drink. "Mama," she whispered, tugging on her mother's dress. "That baby is so thirsty." Her mother glanced out the window, and her heart constricted. She knew that look, a parent watching their child fade away, helpless to intervene. But her husband had been firm. They had to conserve their own meager supplies. Getting involved was too great a risk. "I know, my sweet girl," her mother whispered back, pulling Caroline into a weary embrace. "But there is nothing we can do." Caroline, however, couldn't look away. She saw the native woman try to shield the infant with her own body, saw her gently wipe his brow. The baby's cries had faded throughout the day until he was making almost no sound at all. Her father moved to the window and pulled the rough curtain closed. "Stop looking," he said, his voice tight. "We have our own to worry about." Caroline felt her father's fear, but she also felt a sharp pang in her chest. She looked down at her small canteen, her personal ration of water that had to last until morning, the precious liquid that represented survival. The owner of the trading post, a gruff man named Morrison, had already made it plain that the natives were not welcome inside. They could use his shade, but that was the extent of his charity. As evening fell, the heat barely relented. Caroline lay on her bedroll on the hard floor, trying to sleep. But sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the baby's parched lips, heard the memory of his weakening cries. In the dim light, she could hear her parents' hushed, anxious whispers. They were scared, too. Scared of the unrelenting sun, of their supplies running out, of what lay on the long, dry road ahead. Caroline listened to the cicadas buzzing in the oppressive stillness. Just a few feet away, through a thin wooden wall, a baby was dying. A baby who looked different, whose mother spoke a language she didn't know, but who was just as thirsty and helpless as anyone. She sat up, taking care not to disturb her sleeping parents. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the silhouette of the native woman, still rocking her child. It was in that moment that Caroline made a choice that would challenge everything her family believed about survival and trust in a world that seemed determined to bake the compassion out of people's hearts. What she did next would unleash a chain of events no one could have predicted, and the tribe's response would upend everything the settlers thought they knew about the people they called strangers. Caroline slipped from her bedroll like a phantom, her bare feet silent on the dusty floorboards. The trading post was dark save for the moonlight filtering through the windows, casting long shadows on the walls. She crept toward the door, her precious canteen clutched to her chest. Her heart pounded, but the rhythmic drone of the insects masked her movements. The heavy door was warm to the touch, and she had to use all her strength to lift the iron latch quietly. The moment she opened it, a wave of thick, hot air washed over her. She stepped out into the night, her eyes adjusting to the moonlit landscape. There, huddled against the wall, sat the native woman and her baby. The woman looked up, startled, as the small figure emerged from the building. Her dark eyes were filled with exhaustion and fear, yet also a fierce love that Caroline recognized. The infant in her arms was terrifyingly still. Caroline approached cautiously, holding out the canteen with both hands, her small voice a mere whisper in the vast, hot night. The woman stared, her expression a mix of confusion and wariness. Without another sound, Caroline stepped closer, unscrewed the cap, and carefully tilted the canteen, letting a small trickle of water fall onto the baby's lips. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked from the life-giving water to the little girl's face, searching for a trick. But Caroline just offered a small, hopeful smile and gestured from the canteen to the baby. The universal language of a child's gift required no words. The woman's expression transformed, and tears streamed down her dusty cheeks as she helped her child take another tiny sip. "Caroline!" Her father's voice cracked through the stillness like a whip. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Behind him, her mother was awake, struggling to comprehend the scene. "Get away from them, now," his voice was laced with a fear that made Caroline's stomach clench, but she couldn't move. The baby's color was already seeming to improve, and the native woman was whispering what sounded like prayers in her own tongue. Her father lunged forward, but her mother grabbed his arm. "Wait. Look." The native woman was speaking now, soft words of gratitude that, while unintelligible, were unmistakable in their meaning. She held her baby up slightly, showing them how the water was already reviving him. The child's breathing seemed less shallow, his lips no longer so terribly dry. Morrison appeared in the doorway, roused by the commotion. "What in blazes is going on?" he demanded, then stopped short. "Get that girl inside before she gets us all in trouble," he pointed a finger at the native woman. "And you, keep your distance." But something had shifted. The woman met the father's eyes directly, her own gaze a powerful mix of desperate thanks and profound dignity. She spoke again, her voice stronger. Caroline was now trembling, the magnitude of what she'd done finally hitting her. Her mother rushed forward and scooped her into her arms, carrying her back into the trading post. Yet Caroline kept looking back over her shoulder at the woman and the baby. Inside, her mother held her close. "What were you thinking?" she whispered, her voice holding more than anger. Her father paced, running a hand through his hair. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked, his voice softer now. "That was your water. Your only water until tomorrow." He gestured helplessly toward the door. But Caroline wasn't thinking about practicality. She was thinking about how the baby's face had changed after that small drink. How his mother's tears had looked different from the tears of sorrow she'd been crying before. Outside, a new sound arose, voices speaking in the native language, more than just the mother. Figures had appeared in the moonlit haze, emerging silently from the parched landscape. Morrison squinted out the window. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. Samuel joined him, his face paling. In the shimmering heat rising from the ground, they could see dark figures on horseback, materializing like phantoms. At least a dozen of them, maybe more, all converging on the trading post. Caroline's mother pulled her daughter tighter, her heart pounding. Had her daughter's act of mercy just invited a terrible danger to their door? Her husband's hand moved toward his rifle, and Morrison was already reaching for his own weapon. But outside, the young mother was calling out to the riders, her voice carrying clearly in the still night. She was holding up her reviving baby, pointing from him to the trading post, speaking rapidly in words that sounded both urgent and important. What none of the settlers knew was that word of the small girl's gift had traveled with uncanny speed. And what was approaching through the heat was not a war party, but something far more momentous. The riders dismounted in a practiced silence, their forms solidifying out of the shimmering night. Caroline's father gripped his rifle, but he hesitated. There was no aggression in their movements, no weapons drawn. They formed a respectful semicircle around the woman and her child. An older man with long, grey hair stepped forward, his presence commanding authority. He spoke to the woman in their shared tongue, his voice deep and resonant. She replied quickly, gesturing with the now empty canteen toward the trading post. Morrison cursed under his breath. "This is what I was afraid of. Now we have the whole tribe here because your girl couldn't mind her own business." But Caroline's mother was watching more closely. "Look at them," she urged her husband. "Does that look like an attack to you?" She was right. They seemed to be offering protection, their horses forming a barrier against the vast, empty plains. The grey-haired man approached the door slowly, his hands held open and empty. He stopped at the threshold and called out in heavily accented English, "We wish to speak with the child who gave life's water to our blood." Morrison looked ready to slam the door, but Caroline's father surprised them all by answering. "She's just a little girl," he called back. She didn't understand. She understood perfectly, came the reply. "May we come in?" The night air is too thin for proper words. The request hung in the hot, still air. Morrison shook his head, but Caroline's mother was already moving toward the door. "That baby could have died," she whispered to her husband. "Our daughter may have saved his life." "And now they've come for payment," her husband retorted. "They'll take her from us. We don't know their ways." But Caroline squirmed out of her mother's arms and walked to the door. Ignoring her father's protests, she reached up and opened it wide. The grey-haired man looked down at her, his weathered face solemn but not unkind. Behind him, the young mother stepped forward, her baby now cradled securely. The infant's color was normal, and he made soft sounds of comfort. "You are very small to have such a large spirit," the man said to Caroline, his English careful. The woman, Iona, spoke rapidly to the man, gesturing from Caroline to her baby. He nodded gravely, then looked back at the little girl. "Iona says you saw her son passing from this world and chose to save him with your own life's water. You gave away your protection from the heat to protect one you did not know." Caroline nodded. "He looked thirsty," she said simply. The man translated her words, and a quiet murmur went through the group of warriors. The grey-haired man knelt to Caroline's eye level. "In our ways, such a gift has great weight. When one saves the life of another, especially a child, a debt is created that must be honored." Her father stepped forward protectively. "She doesn't want anything. She's a child." The man rose slowly, his gaze moving between the parents and the child. Understanding and consequence are two different things. What your daughter did will be remembered for generations. But first, the immediate debt must be paid. He gestured to his people, who began moving toward their horses. Her father tensed, but what happened next defied all his expectations. Because what the tribal people were about to do would challenge everything the settlers believed about generosity, honor, and the nature of reciprocity. In a land where survival meant guarding every last drop, the tribal people began unloading bundles from their horses with quiet purpose. Caroline's father watched in disbelief as they produced items that seemed miraculous in the midst of a drought: large, full water skins, bags of dried fruit and jerky, bundles of medicinal herbs, and most astonishingly, a small, intricately beaded pouch that seemed to capture the moonlight. The grey-haired man, whom the others called Toto, directed the proceedings with subtle gestures. He spoke again to Caroline's father. "What your daughter did cannot be ignored. A life debt must be answered with life." "We don't want anything," her father insisted, though his voice wavered. "She gave the water freely." "Freely given, freely returned," Toto replied. "But with the interest that honor requires." Iona, the young mother, approached with her baby. She spoke to Toto, her words emotional and clear. He turned back to the settlers. "Iona wishes for you to know that your daughter did not just save her son from thirst. She saved him from death. He was fading, and without that water, he would not have seen the sunrise." Caroline's mother gasped, the full weight of her daughter's act settling upon her. This was not just a kindness, it was a miracle. "She also asks that you understand," Toto continued, "the child your daughter saved is not just any child. He is the son of our future chief, a direct descendant of the one who led our people to these lands. Your daughter saved not just a life, but a future." Morrison, who had been silent, finally spoke. "That's all very nice, but can't this wait until the heat breaks?" Toto's eyes locked onto Morrison with a gaze that made the trader recoil. "Honor does not wait for cooler weather. A debt of this size must be answered now. The tribesmen had finished arranging the items near the entrance, a display of life-sustaining gifts in the dust. We offer these not as payment, Hatoto explained. We offer them as recognition of the spirit in that small child. He gestured to the gifts. Water to sustain her family. Food to give them strength. Medicine to guard their health. And this he held up the beaded pouch. This was made by our most skilled artisan. It carries a blessing of endurance that will protect your daughter always. Caroline stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. But her father remained wary. Why would you give so much for a sip of water? What do you really want? Hatoto's expression grew serious. You do not see the importance of what happened here. Your daughter looked upon a dying child of a different people, with different words and different skin, and she saw not a stranger, but a soul in need. In a world that teaches us to fear what is different, she chose compassion. The night seemed to grow even quieter, as if the land itself were listening. Such spirits are rare. They must be honored. What we give is not payment, but a recognition of something sacred. Caroline's mother was moved to tears, finally understanding. This was about more than an exchange of goods, it was a profound spiritual acknowledgement. But as Hatoto reached out to hand the precious pouch to Caroline, a harsh voice cut through the night. Well, looks like we found ourselves a little party. Everyone turned to see a group of rough-looking men emerging from the darkness, their faces hard with a familiar, poisoning hatred. The leader was looking at Caroline and her family with a smile that promised only trouble. Sometimes, when two worlds try to connect, there are always those who would rather see them burn. The newcomers rode in like specters of violence. Their leader was a scarred man with cold eyes and a cruel sneer. Name's Garrett, he announced without dismounting. Heard there was some trouble at Morrison's. Looks like we got here just in time. Morrison stepped forward. No trouble here, Garrett. Just folks. Garrett's laugh was like grinding stones. No trouble? I see a pack of hostiles surrounding white folk. Looks like plenty of trouble to me. His gaze fell on the gifts laid out in the dust. Looks like they're trying to trade for something. Question is, what? Hatoto stood perfectly still, but the other tribal members subtly shifted their stances, ready to defend. They aren't trading, said Caroline's father, stepping in front of his family. My daughter helped their child, and they are showing their thanks. Help them. Garrett spat on the ground. You let your little girl get mixed up in their business? That's not helping, friend. That's asking for it. Caroline, holding her mother's hand, looked up at the angry man, confused. She couldn't grasp why helping a thirsty baby would make someone so mad. Iona, sensing the danger, clutched her infant and spoke urgently to Hatoto. The old leader's face darkened, but his voice remained steady. We seek no conflict, Hatoto said to Garrett. We came only to honor a debt. Debt? Garrett laughed again. The only debt they understand is the one they owe for all the trouble they cause. One of his men chimed in, maybe we ought to teach them what happened when they get too bold. The tension became a palpable thing. Caroline's mother pulled her daughter behind her as Morrison retreated toward his doorway, wanting no part in the inevitable clash. But it was Caroline who broke the standoff. She stepped out from behind her mother and walked toward Garrett's horse, her small voice cutting through the hatred. Why are you so angry? She asked, looking up at him with honest curiosity. They just wanted to say thank you. Garrett stared down at her, taken aback. For a second, his sneer faltered. Get back, little girl, he said, his voice losing some of its edge. This ain't for children. But it started with a child, Caroline replied. Their baby was thirsty, so I gave him my water. Now they want to give us things. That seems fair. The simplicity of her logic hung in the air, a direct challenge to the complex hatred that drove Garrett and his men. A 6-year-old girl had reduced their entire worldview to its most basic elements, a need met with kindness, and kindness returned. Hatoto watched, his eyes moving between the innocent child and the men who embodied the conflict between their peoples. Your daughter speaks a wisdom that shames grown men, he said quietly to her father. But Garrett's momentary confusion was being replaced by a darker resolve. The way his hand drifted toward his pistol suggested he was not interested in lessons from a child. Some men choose hatred so completely that even innocence becomes a threat to their darkness. Garrett's hand hovered over his weapon, but something in Caroline's unwavering gaze held him motionless. Everyone watched as a 6-year-old girl faced down a man known for his brutality. "You know what I think," Caroline continued, completely oblivious to her peril. "I think you're thirsty, too. And when people get really thirsty, sometimes they get angry instead of just asking for help." The word struck Garrett like a physical blow. His scarred face contorted with emotions he clearly fought to suppress. Behind him, his men shifted, unsure how to react. Caroline's mother stepped forward to pull her back, but Hototo raised a hand, stopping her. The old leader saw something significant unfolding. "That's enough from you," Garrett snarled, his anger returning. "You people pack up this little friendship circle and move on. You ain't welcome here." But just as he spoke, the oppressive heat seemed to lessen. A gentle breeze stirred the dust, the first sign of a break in the weather. And through the clearing air, they all saw more lights approaching in the distance, the warm glow of lanterns carried by other settler families, drawn to the trading post by news of the tribe's arrival. "Well now," Morrison muttered. "Looks like we're about to have a real town meeting." The approaching settlers, women, children, and men, moved with purpose. As they drew closer, their lantern light illuminated the scene, tribesmen and settlers standing together, with a small girl at the center of it all. Garrett's expression soured. "Perfect. Now we got witnesses to this foolishness." But the settlers' reactions were not what he expected. An elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, was the first to arrive. "What is all this?" she asked, her gaze taking in the scene with curiosity, not fear. "The little one, she saved our baby," Iona said, her English broken but clear. She held up her infant, now alert and content. "She gave water so our son could live." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. She looked from the baby to Caroline, then to the gifts. "Heavens, child! You saved this little one's life." Caroline nodded shyly. As more settlers arrived, the story spread through the crowd. Instead of fear, their faces showed awe. "That's the most decent thing I've heard all summer," another woman said. A young father holding his own son stepped forward. "Takes courage to give up your water for a stranger." Garrett saw his support dissolving. These were families who understood desperation and valued kindness. "You're all being fooled," he cried out. "It's a trick." But Hototo stepped forward and addressed the gathered settlers. "Your child did something our people will tell stories about for generations," he said, his voice carrying in the calming air. "She saw past the things that divide us and acted from her heart. This is not a trick. This is the spirit that can heal the wounds between our peoples." He gestured to his men, who began to offer water from their large skins to the newly arrived families. The settlers looked at one another, amazed. They had come expecting trouble and instead found a moment of profound connection. But Garrett was not finished. His face was flushed with rage, his hand now resting on his pistol. "This ends now," he growled. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. The greatest threat to hatred is not force, but the simple power of human connection, and some will do anything to sever that bond. What happened next would become a local legend. As Garrett's hand tightened on his weapon, everyone knew they were at a turning point. It was Mrs. Patterson who moved first. The elderly woman planted herself directly between Garrett and Hototo. "Garrett Mitchell," she said, her voice sharp with authority. "You put that hand away. There's been enough hate in this land to last 10 lifetimes, and I won't see more of it spilled over a child's kindness." Other settlers moved, not away, but closer. They formed a loose circle around Caroline and the tribal people, their lanterns creating a warm glow that pushed back the darkness. "These people came in peace," said the young father. "They came to honor what our little girl did. If we can't respect that, what are we?" Garrett looked around for support, but even his own men now seemed hesitant, unwilling to draw weapons on their neighbors. Hototo stepped forward, his hands open. "I have seen many seasons of conflict," he said, his voice heavy with experience. "I have seen what it costs both our peoples. Tonight, a child showed us another way." He gestured to Caroline. She did not see a native baby or a white baby. She saw a baby who was thirsty. "It is time for the adults to learn from her wisdom." The tribal leader reached into a pouch and withdrew a beautifully carved wooden cup. "In our tradition, we share water to seal an agreement. Tonight, I offer to share with any who would choose peace." Caroline's father found himself stepping forward. "I'll share with you," he said, his voice steady. "My daughter showed more courage tonight than I have in my entire life." One by one, other settlers joined him. Mrs. Patterson, the young father, even Morrison. Only Garrett and his men were left standing apart, isolated by their own bitterness. Hototo filled the cup and passed it to Caroline's father. As the two men drank from the same vessel, something profound shifted. The oppressive heat had finally broken, and stars began to pepper the sky. For the first time, two communities long divided by fear found themselves united by the simple act of a 6-year-old girl. Iona approached Caroline and gently placed the beaded pouch in her hands. The child looked up and smiled, a gesture that needed no translation, and Iona smiled back, tears of gratitude on her cheeks. Garrett turned his horse and rode into the night, his men trailing behind him. His hatred had found no fertile ground here, defeated not by violence, but by simple human decency. As the two groups began to share food and water around a small fire, Caroline sat with the pouch in her lap, watching the adults learn what she had always known: when someone is thirsty, you give them a drink, and when someone shows kindness, you return it. Her canteen was empty, but her heart was full. She had learned that the smallest acts of courage can change the world, one person at a time. In the years that followed, the story was told and retold, and everyone agreed that peace in the territory began not with a treaty, but with a 6-year-old girl who saw a dying baby and chose compassion over fear.